Welcome to the Genealogy Gems podcast, providing quick and innovative ways to make the absolute most out of your research time and creative ideas for sharing and displaying your family history. I'm your host, Lisa Louise Cook. Welcome to Genealogy Gems podcast episode number 111. I appreciate you joining me here today. I've been meeting a lot of new folks through the webinars that I've been doing recently for RootsMagic's webinar series, and I want to welcome all of you who are new to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us here. I hope you have a good time. This week we did a 90-minute presentation of Google Earth for genealogy, and I have to say the response has been fantastic. I've had so many emails from those of you who attended, and I can just read the excitement in your words. Everyone who tuned in was really picking up on what has me so excited about Google Earth for genealogy, and that's the fact that it's an amazing tool for bringing all of your family history research together in one place in a very visual way, and that makes it just an amazingly powerful family storytelling tool. And of course, in the end, I think that's one of the most important things that we're trying to do, really, in our research. Share and then tell compelling stories about our ancestors so that they're not forgotten, so that they are passed down to the future generations. And I think a lot of people thought when they first tuned in to the webinar that we were just going to spend an hour and a half, looking at maps, because, of course, maps are what comes to mind when you think about Google Earth. But I think everyone came away with a very clear understanding that it is so much more than maps, particularly when you use it for genealogy. So we just had a wonderful time. I've got a bunch of emails here. In fact, after the Google Search Tips and Tricks webinar, which was a couple of weeks ago, Penny wrote in. She said, "Loved your webinar for RootsMagic. I had the reputation for being pretty sharp with Google searching, but you leave me in the dust." Boy, that's high praise. Thank you, Penny. And Eileen wrote, "Fantastic webinar. Can't wait to try it out." And then after this Google Earth webinar, Valerie wrote in saying, "Great show, learned a lot." Lots of exclamation points. "Can't wait to get started with Google Earth. Ordered your 2 discs right after the webinar." And Mary wrote, she says, "Your Google Earth webinar this evening was golden." Ooh, I like that term, golden. Thank you for giving so much to the genealogy community. Oh, Mary, I love doing what I do, so it's certainly my pleasure. And Kim wrote, "Great webinar. Learned so much. I'll never get any rest tonight. Thanks, Lisa." Well, now, Kim, you're in my boat. Never getting any sleep. Something's got to go, right? So we'll just throw sleep out the window. Well, I just want to thank all of you for attending. It was a ton of fun. And don't worry if you missed either one of those webinars, because the great folks over at RootsMagic are posting them on their website for free. So just go to genealogygems.com/rootsmagic.htm and you will find the link to the free webinars over on their site. And in addition to the Google Earth for Genealogy webinar where we did this last week, we also published Genealogy Gems Premium Podcast episode number 69, which features an interview I did with Richard Gray. He's the head of marketing over at deceasedonline.com. And in fact, as I was putting this episode together, I just got an email from Richard saying that they have just added 175,000 North Hampshire burial and cremation records to their website, and they should be available online by early July. Now, of course, if you aren't familiar with Deceased Online, they are focused on burial and cremation records over in the UK. And Richard says here, the first data release comprises burial records for 7 towns in the English East Midlands area of northeast North Hampshire: Broughton, Burton, Latimer, Cransley, Desborough, Pitchley, Rothwell, and Rushton. Ooh, I hope I said all those names right. And he says, in all, there are approximately 24,000 records in the first batch of data, dating back to 1888, the largest of which is Rushton. The data comprises register scans and grave details for all 24,000 burials, photos of all memorials in Broughton, Cransley, and Pitchley cemeteries are also included, and there are some photos for memorials in other cemeteries. The remaining 151,000 records are from Kettering's two cemeteries, London Road and Rothwell Road, and the town's crematorium, which serves a large area stretching across much of North Hampshire and into the neighboring West Cambridgeshire and South Leicestershire. Am I saying that right? It seems like it should be more syllables than that. I'm sure somebody over there in the UK can write me and correct me. I want to say Leicestershire. Anyway, so these are expected to be added to the Deceased Online database in early July, so put it on your calendar to check back to the Deceased Online website in July. And in addition to some recently published datasets for cemeteries in Wiltshire, records for Trowbridge, the seventh and largest, are now available at deceasedonline.com. It says here, register scans and grave details for all 20,666 burials back to 1856 are included. And Richard says here, he's got some great news coming up soon, and he said all he will say is that it pertains to a large Scottish city. So if you have Scottish ancestor research to do, this sounds intriguing. Keep an eye on Deceased Online. So that's all great news. Thank you very much, Richard, for checking in with us here. And certainly you can hear more from Richard personally in that premium podcast episode that we just got published. He's just a wealth of knowledge. And speaking of new records online, Family Search has just completed the 1930 Mexico census, and they've announced that it's now available for free online. Fantastic. It says here in their announcement, the Family Search volunteers did it. With the completion of the state of Veracruz, they indexed the entire 1930 Mexico census, about 13 million records. Add the census to the millions of Mexico church records Family Search also has online for free, and Family Search patrons now have a phenomenal, fundamental asset for their Mexico ancestral research. These are part of a total of 59 collections that were updated in this release, comprising 25 million new images and records for 19 U.S. states and 16 countries. So you can search all of these updated collections now for free at familysearch.org. And we have some good news around here. In fact, I discovered this even before I got the word from our app developer, because I was on my iPad. I got one of those iPad 2s. I waited for the second version of it, and I was playing with my iPad, and I was just checking out the Genealogy Gems podcast app and kind of making sure everything was running smoothly when I saw how great it looked. And it turns out right after that, got an email from our app developer saying that our Genealogy Gems iPhone app has been updated and is now iPad compatible. Because as you know, of course, the iPad screen is larger than the iPhone screen. So when you download the latest update for your Genealogy Gems iPhone app, it will instantly be iPad compatible. It's automatic. You don't have to do anything special. It's always worked on the iPad, but it would kind of come across still formatted for the smaller iPhone. Well, this new update is universal. So you don't have to purchase a new version of the app. All you need to do is just go in there and update the one that you have. And of course, if you don't already have the app, it's available in the iTunes store, and I'll have a link for you in the show notes. But one of the things I really like about this new update, including the fact that it's iPad compatible, is that locating all the extras that we tuck in there into the app, those bonuses, it's never been easier to get a hold of them, because now you can view them all in one place to make sure that you haven't missed anything. And this is great because in the past, you had to go into each episode separately in the app to find the bonus content, but now it's all kind of corralled together. And you can also now play one episode after another automatically. This is new. You don't have to manually start the next episode, which really is nice because it kind of makes the app hands-free. And you can turn that setting on or off depending on how you want to set it up. And overall, the playback experience now is supposed to be much better with overall better performance. That's all been improved. So I'm really excited about this. It's just fun to see what they're able to do with it and to see it keeping up with the technology. Seems like every time we turn around, there's some new device out there, isn't there? So anyway, I hope you're enjoying the podcast and streaming it on your iPhone or your iPad. And of course, we do have our Android version as well. So make sure that you download that update. You got to have the update to make all this happen, and that'll activate all the new features, not just the iPad compatibility. Also, if you have the Genealogy Gems app and you're enjoying it, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Would you please go in and rate the new version with a 5-star rating? Ratings are really important in the app world, and I really appreciate your support with that. It helps kind of boost it up the list and get it more visible for other people who might be interested in family history. So I appreciate you doing that. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to shamelessly ask for your help on one more thing, okay? So many of you have purchased my new book, The Genealogist's Google Toolbox. And first off, I just want to say a very truly heartfelt thank you for doing so. I really appreciate it. I loved writing that book. It was a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite topics. It just makes me so happy that so many of you picked up a copy and that you've written in to tell me how it's helping you with your online family research. That is so gratifying as an author, I tell you. It's really nice. And I just about went into shock, of course, the first time that somebody asked me to sign a copy of it at a conference. I'm like, what? You want me to sign? Oh, I guess I'm an author. Okay, that's great. So that was pretty cool. So anyway, it's been very, very nice to hear how much everybody's been enjoying it. And the thing is, in this modern social networking online world, again, ratings means a lot. And that's how websites decide what gets featured on their website homepage and what they're going to recommend to their customers, just like iTunes does, and it's kind of decides how far up the ladder it gets. Well, as you know, my book is published and distributed through Lulu.com. And in fact, I have the Genealogy Gems store there at Lulu with a lot of different products. Well, they have a rating for books as well, just like with the app in iTunes. And I would so appreciate it. If you bought the book, if you're enjoying it, if it's helping you out, I would love it if you would go into Lulu.com. And I think that you'll need to go to the My Lulu tab. And you just click My Orders. You'll find that in the orange bar across the top. And if you would give the book a 5-star rating, if you feel that way about it and you're enjoying it, that would be wonderful. Now, I actually couldn't test this out myself, obviously, because it's my book. So I think that's how the rating system works. Or you may just be able to go into Lulu.com, look up the book in the search box, and be able to rate it right there. But I would think that it would be tied to the fact that you purchased the book. So either check on the book page itself or under your specific order that you placed under My Lulu. And maybe if one of you rates the book, you can email me and tell me exactly how it worked, because I don't know how that works exactly. But I do appreciate the effort any of you want to make in doing that. If you wouldn't mind taking just a minute, and if you bought the book and you've enjoyed it, if you could mark it with that 5-star rating, that would be wonderful. I would really appreciate your help. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, enough of my shameless asking for help, asking you for things. I want to share things with you here. And actually, finally, I have a bit of sad news. Google has abandoned their master plan to archive the world's newspapers. Google announced it this month that they have notified their partners in the News Archive project that they are going to stop accepting, scanning, and indexing microfilm and other archival materials from newspapers, and that they are instead focusing their energies on, quote, newer projects that help the industry, such as Google OnePass, a platform that enables publishers to sell content and subscriptions directly from their own sites. Well, the News Archive project has been around for about 5 years, and I did a video on the labs version of it. I've talked about it in the different webinars, and it was really Google's attempt to do for old newspapers what Google Books had been kind of trying to do for the world's libraries and all the books in the world. Well, the idea was that newspapers would kind of open up their vaults to Google, and then Google would promise to scan and index and host the digital images, those files that they make from the archives. Google and the newspapers would then share revenue on the page views of those different archives. And Google says it eventually did scan 60 million pages covering 250 years. But of course, everything that was scanned was not necessarily yet posted. Some newspapers complained that Google, after very quickly scanning their archives, was really slow to actually process them and get them up on the website. One newspaper sent Google a collection of archives. I was reading about this, and it was covering several decades, and they reported back that only a fraction of any of those ever made their way online, which I think was pretty disappointing to hear. But it's still a huge collection. Now, the News Archive was not a bad deal for the newspapers, especially the smaller ones, because they couldn't really afford to digitize their content themselves. But although I've been talking about the News Archive, like I say, for a long time, I don't recall ever seeing Google promote it. So it's interesting to watch how some of these projects that Google gets going, they kind of come online as sort of a startup, but they don't really take off. And Google doesn't do much in the way of real forward promotion. And I imagine that all of this has something to do with Google not coming up with really a viable business model to make the newspaper project profitable. I mean, digitizing records really only works if, in the end, you find a way to pay for it. So, thankfully, Google did say in a press release email that it would continue to support the existing archives that it has scanned and indexed. And it added, quote, "We do not, however, plan to introduce any further features or functionality to the digitized news product." So it's not going away. It's just not going to grow, and it's not going to be officially supported any longer by Google. What we don't know is whether Google will finish indexing the newspapers that it's already scanned. They've been scanned, but they're not indexed and up online. I hope that they do, but I've actually been reading a lot of folks aren't very optimistic about it. Google used to actually charge the newspapers a fee for the digital content that they created from their archives. And which, again, particularly for smaller newspapers, they really appreciate that because it's cheaper to pay Google for the digitized scans than to actually do the scanning project in-house. But the word is that they are doing what I think is the right thing, and they are waiving that fee. And Google is not only giving publishers free access to the scanned files, but also the rights to publish them, which of course is the other piece of the puzzle. And they can have those rights to publish them with other partners. So again, we may still see this newspaper content pop up in other places. And I'm going to keep my ears and eyes open, and I will let you know certainly if I hear any more about where they show up. Seems like a great opportunity for sites like Ancestry or Genealogy Bank to step in, don't you think? All right, well, that's the genealogy news. Coming up next, I've got your emails in the mailbox. Okay, well, here in the mailbox, as we approach the Memorial Day holiday, Brant from Washington writes in with a question about military records. He says, "I recently found this Civil War pension application index record for one of my ancestors, Alexander B. Shute," and he sent me the card, which you can see in the show notes. The index references 2 applications for pensions, one for an invalid and one for his widow. Do you know how I could go about finding these applications? I'm very interested to see what they can tell me about Alexander. Thanks for the fantastic podcast, and keep the gems coming. Well, thank you, Brant. Well, after receiving your email, I went straight to an expert who teaches on just this subject for Family Tree University, who I finally had the pleasure to meet in person not long ago at the Ohio Genealogical Society Conference, and that is Diana Chrisman Smith. I sent her Brant's question, and here's what she said. Okay, Diana says, for Civil War veterans, the invalid file for the veteran and the widow's file are filed together at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. If there was a file for a minor child, it would also end up in the same file. There is a project underway in partnership between NARA, Footnote, and Family Search to index and digitize all of the Civil War widows' pension files. However, at this time, they're only about 2% complete. The index card for your Alexander Shute indicates that he did receive the requested invalid pension, and his widow received her requested pension, and there are both applications and certificate numbers for both. These application files should indeed show you information about Alexander. However, his widow's pension file is not among those yet completed when I checked. For those who are digitized in this project, the images of the complete file are available online at footnote.com by searching for the widow's name, the veteran's name, or the widow's certificate, which is the WC number. For those who are not yet completed in this project, the next option is to request the file directly from the National Archives. And this can be done in one of three ways. Number one, you can visit the National Archives in Washington, D.C., where the originals are located, and you can view the file, making whatever copies you wish personally. This is the least expensive option if it is in your neighborhood, since you can be selective about which pages that you may wish to copy. The second option is to visit archives.com and obtain Form N like Nancy, A T like Tom, F like Frank, -85 to request the document copies by mail. The instructions indicate that the price for the file, currently $75 for the full file, up to 100 pages, plus 65 cents for additional pages. A little pricey. And number three, complete and submit the form NATF-85 online. Same prices apply, but the service is faster. As the digitization project progresses, more files are going to be available online, making access easier. For now, NARA is about the only game in town for most pension files. Note that this information is for Union veteran files. The access for Confederate files is different and a subject for another day. Well, I knew Diana would be the right person to go to. Thank you so much, Diana Chrisman-Smith. And if you are interested in learning more about military records, you can join one of Diana's upcoming classes at Family Tree University. She teaches military records for genealogists and also Civil War research. Find your ancestors in the war between the states. And actually, as I was thinking about it, I checked in with the Family Tree University administrator, and they gave me the go-ahead to give you a coupon code that will get you $10 off any class. So you can use the coupon code FTUCOOK, and it's COOKE, all together, and that way you can save a little bit of money. And of course, I teach some classes over at Family Tree University too, and it would always be fun to see you in class. So, hey, Brant, thank you for a great question, and Diana, thank you for a great answer. Appreciate it. And also, Barbara writes in about how to find proof. She writes, I recently found a record from my great-great-grandmother at the St. John's Almshouse. The age is only a couple of years off. How can I verify that this record is indeed for her? Even on my other side, the cemetery stone of my great-great-grandmother has the wrong date of death. What alternatives do I have to prove this, other than hiring a professional genealogist? Well, Barbara's talking about the St. John's Almshouse, which is poorhouse records over in the UK. And really, Barbara, without seeing the record or the research that you've done so far, I think the advice would be just to stay focused on the overall picture. Just continue investigating all avenues to see if you can reach a logical conclusion that is or is not, to the best of your knowledge, your ancestor. Unfortunately, not all records can be verified 100%. That's the sad truth of it all. It's also very true that an age being off a couple of years is not unusual, and there can be a lot of different reasons why, the wrong age might be documented. So before heading out to a professional genealogist, which of course would cost money, I would recommend a couple of things. First of all, and I've mentioned this lately, it just seems to come up a lot, but it's so true. Do some searching over at the Family Search Wiki to see if you can find any articles that give you more insight into, one, poorhouse records, and two, to see if there's any mention of the St. John's Almshouse records specifically. Lots of experts and people who get involved with very specific areas of research write it up, put it in articles, and post it up on the wiki. So that's just a wonderful way to tap into the brain trust of the overall genealogy community. Second thing I would suggest is try contacting a reference librarian at one of the leading repositories and posing a few specific questions to see if they can get you in the right direction. Of course, I would recommend the National Archives UK. I don't know what their policy is in terms of responding, but the second one is I would suggest the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, because you can contact them by mail or by phone. And my understanding in talking with the experts there is that they really do strive to answer your questions. So provide them with a digital copy of the record, give them a specific question and some specifics around that, and see if somebody there can't at least point you in the right direction. They may not have the records at that repository, whether it's the National Archives or the Family History Library, but they typically will have somebody in-house who's very familiar with those records and could maybe, again, point you in the right direction to know where to go from there. So I hope that helps out, Barbara, and thank you so much for writing now. We wish you good luck with your search and verification of dates. It is frustrating when you find dates and ages that just don't quite add up. But of course, we all know that there's lots of reasons why we might not tell the honest truth about our age, right? Well, I'm sure our ancestors did anyway. Okay, well, coming up next, I have a gem that springs from another listener's email, and that is coming up right after this.
Profile America, Monday, May 30th. Today is Memorial Day, looked on as the start of the summer season and a time for family gatherings and sporting events. But the true meaning of the day is underlined by the continuing sacrifices made by U.S. forces in several Middle East operations. The first official observance of Memorial Day was on this date in 1868, ordered by General John Logan, when flowers were placed on the graves of both Union and Confederate soldiers at Arlington National Cemetery. From the Civil War through Vietnam, some 566,000 U.S. service personnel died in combat, more than half of them in World War II. Across the U.S., there are just over 23 million veterans of the armed forces. You can find these and more facts about America from the U.S. Census Bureau online at census.gov.
Are you looking to take the next step in your family history research and start recording your family tree in your own genealogy database? Or are you looking to make a switch to a more user-friendly genealogy software program? When my listeners and students ask me which program I prefer, I always recommend RootsMagic. It's the program I decided to make the switch to a couple of years ago, and I am so glad I did. You just won't find a more powerful genealogy software program, and building your family tree is easier than ever with the new RootsMagic 4. With RootsMagic, you can add unlimited facts, find anyone in your database with lightning speed with RootsMagic Explorer, quickly and easily create perfectly formatted sources with the RootsMagic Source Wizard. It makes it so easy. You can create customized reports, and best of all, you can now take RootsMagic wherever your research takes you with RootsMagic to Go, which lets you run RootsMagic directly off your flash drive. And RootsMagic makes it a snap to share your family history. You know how important I think that is. It'll help you publish a book, create stunning wall charts, shareable CDs, even create websites automatically from your data. Really, what are you waiting for? Download your risk-free trial of RootsMagic 4 and see why professionals and beginners alike choose RootsMagic at rootsmagic.com. Not long ago, I got an email from Michelle who had a suggestion for a podcast gem, a segment on British home children. While I'd heard that term before, I really hadn't come face to face with it in my own research. And Michelle explained in her email that these were children who were orphans or impoverished youths who were shipped to Canada from Great Britain through philanthropic agencies between 1869 and 1930. Michelle said that she had an uncle whose grandmother and some of her siblings were British home children, and she'd be interested in learning more about them. So I did a little bit of initial research on the subject, and I'll be honest, I was very taken aback by the stories that I read. This wasn't just an immigration policy. This was a story of poverty, families coming apart, and sometimes even being torn apart. And it didn't really end until about the 1930s. But the effects on the British home children have reverberated through the decades since the policy itself came to an end. Well, one name that surfaced again and again as I was doing my research was Roger Kershaw. Roger joined the National Archives in the UK in 1986, and he's now the head of Military, Maritime, and Family Records for the Advice and Records Knowledge Department. He has over 20 years of experience in researching records at TNA and other archives, and he's published several books, including Immigrants and Aliens, which is a guide to sources on UK immigration and citizenship, Immigrants and Expats, A Guide to Sources on UK Residents Overseas, Family History on the Move, and the book that I'm going to be discussing with him today, which is New Lives for Old, The Story of Britain's Child Migrants. Here's my conversation with Roger Kershaw. One of my longtime listeners had written me and said that she had an ancestor who lived in the UK and as a child had been sent overseas. And she was wondering if I had more information or knew somebody who might be an expert on the subject. And as I was looking around the internet, your book, New Lives for Old, really kind of stood out as an amazing story of Britain's child migrants. I imagine that parents were in a panic to keep their children safe, and yet, of course, sending our children away is not the first thing that comes to mind. How did this policy get started?
Well, it really got started when they started to, the Industrial Revolution really started to take place, and they started to knock down buildings to make way for the railways. And that had a two-pronged effect. Firstly, the rural economy was collapsing as industry took pace. So a lot of people from the rural areas were pushing into the cities, but when they were doing that, there was less and less accommodation for them because a lot of the buildings, as I said, were knocked down to build the railways. So this is where the destitution happened, and a lot of the adults actually would abandon their children, or a lot of them would die in starvation, or many of them would actually be resort to crime and become convicted criminals. So in many cases, the children who were sent overseas were orphans or had been abandoned by their parents.
That's amazing. Now, how many children are we talking about between that time period of about 1869 to the late 1930s?
Well, it's difficult to sort of kind of be exact on this, but most historians agree that it's between about 80 and 100,000 children.
Boy, that's amazing. So what was the process? How was a child identified as somebody who would be put into this program and be sent to hopefully a better life?
Well, as I said before, it was really children who had ended up in some of the large orphanages and children's homes. So homes that were run by people such as Dr. Barnardo. But prior to that, there are other evangelists such as Annie McPherson and Maria Rye. So these children had been abandoned or they'd resorted to crime. And the thinking very much at the time was that they would probably have a better chance of survival and a better opportunities by moving to Canada, because Canada offered a lot more than Britain in terms of healthier living, certainly healthier than the city slums. But also, it was before the Education Act of 1870, so initially they could have better chances of equipping themselves with particular skills and become efficient in agricultural pursuits.
Right. Now, when they would send them over to Canada, let's say, who would be on the receiving end and who agrees to take all these children and take this responsibility?
Well, it was kind of a very tight, efficient industry. Maria Rye, for example, and Annie McPherson, they would set up, they would really assess children, and they would provide a service to the government, and what that service would be was that they would be responsible for transporting that child across to Canada, arranging for them to go to what's known as a receiving home or hostel, and then ensuring that they went to suitable homes, and then they would then be responsibly looked after, or that was the intention. So the government would actually pay people like Annie McPherson and Maria Rye an amount for each child from the workhouse or from the orphanage.
Wow, amazing. Now, Canada was not the only country taking these children in. What other countries were doing this?
Well, there are 4 or 5 countries, but the main one was Canada, and the second largest receiver was Australia. Australia would take probably between 7,000 and 11,000 children from around about 1902 and 1911, right up to as late as the 1960s. And Rhodesia also took children, but we're talking about no more than a few hundred. And similarly, a few went to New Zealand as well.
Wow. Now, I imagine in researching the book, you probably tried to track down some of the folks who might have been sent over to Canada or to Australia, or perhaps their families. Tell us about the research side of your work in putting this book together.
Well, the book was written by myself and Janet Sachs, and Janet Sachs actually dealt more on the Canadian side, and I dealt more on the Australian side. So you're right, we did get in touch with, well, we actually managed to research original records held here at the National Archives in Kew. But we also gained access to other records, such as records in the custody of Dr. Barnardos, because at the end of the day, Dr. Barnardos were the biggest player in this. They would send more children to Canada and Australia than any other of the charities that were involved in this. So it's quite interesting reading accounts written by the children in their own words before they were sent overseas. And when you read these, they sound very excited, and they sound, very full of life and hope and opportunity as they actually travel towards their destination. But as they get closer and closer, you can sense as they become more sort of uneasy about it.
Mm-hmm.
The reality kicks in that they're an incredibly long way away from what has been home. And of course, for most of these children, particularly in Australia and obviously in Canada, they never did return to the United Kingdom.
Yeah, what an amazing long journey it would have been to Australia. It must have just seemed like forever, and wondering if it would ever end. Did they keep siblings together making these journeys, maybe for a little bit of comfort, or were children essentially separated?
Well, some children were separated. Children would sometimes travel together, but actually at the other side in Australia, sometimes children were separated, particularly if there was quite a gap in their ages. So they go to different schools or different hospitals, and a lot depended on the institution and the organisation that was facilitating their journey across the world.
Wow. Now, in the end, as you read these stories and kind of followed up on the outcome, what are your impressions? Was this something where, in general, the children did benefit because life was so destitute in the UK? Or what does the outcome kind of look like for these children?
I think in terms of the Canada episode, quite clearly there are real accounts where the children never did ever see their parents again. So it was that permanent separation which is very, very difficult to justify.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, there is evidence to suggest that had they stayed, on the streets in London in the 1860s or 70s, they would probably have had a very unfortunate life, and it probably would have lasted a lot less than their life did in Canada. And a lot of the children went on to have good lives, and they were equipped with good skills, and they settled, in Canada. There was always this sense of not necessarily belonging either to Canada or to England, and that was the same for the Australians. There was a sense that they weren't wanted. It was interesting how, they were known as the home children, and there's a couple of theories behind why they were called the home children. Well, was it because they came from the homeland, so they were never really accepted or seen as being Canadian, or was it because they came from institutions or homes in that kind of like wider definition?
Amazing. So what brought this to an end? You said it was about the 1930s. Certainly World War II was after that. What ended this particular length of migration? Yeah,
the policy of emigrating the children to Canada came really to an end in the 1920s and early 30s. One reason was that the economic depression meant that there wasn't really this need for more children to actually go to Canada and help develop the land and the economy, because we were entering a period of depression and recession. And in fact, very few children really went to Canada really after the 1920s. So attention was turned more to Australia, and in Australia there was still a great desire to have more children to actually go around and go to Australia. And had it not been for the start of the Second World War, the numbers could have actually exceeded the numbers that went to Canada. So we could have been talking about 80,000 as opposed to the estimated 12,000. And really what brought it to an end in Australia in the 1960s was that attitudes changed so quickly from the end of the Second World War to the 1960s. All of a sudden, keeping children in institutions, is deemed to be unacceptable. So rather than being sent by institutions from one country to another, the policy of being adopted or fostered by families was much more preferable.
My goodness. Yeah, it's amazing. Finally, I'm real interested. I know that you read so many of the different accounts of these children's lives and the experiences. Was there any one story that kind of really stood out to you that you feature in the book that you found just riveting?
I think it was one, and it was the children who were going to Australia, and it was the account on the ship, and they described in great detail about, the different animals that they'd see, the different climate that they recorded, and it was all very much like an adventure to them. And even being on this ship, which was an old, cruise ship, was exciting, even though it would take up to 7 or 8 weeks, and up to 7 weeks sometimes. But they'd also mix in with all the other, passengers on the ship. So those accounts were quite interesting, particularly when they obviously didn't realise this at that stage, but particularly that this was going to be a permanent move for them.
Oh, exactly. Well, it's a fascinating book. Again, it's called New Lives for Old. Roger, what are you working on these days? Have you got your eye on a new publication?
No, not particularly. I mean, I work in the National Archives, and my job actually works with military records, maritime records, transport records, and family history. So we're looking very much at focusing on big anniversaries, and obviously next year is going to be the Titanic. So we're hoping to, look at our collection in the office and see whether we can promote records relating to the Titanic in time for the anniversary in 2012.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Roger, thank you so much for taking a few moments out to share with us your book. And these stories are just amazing. It's hard to imagine what the children went through, and yet it sounded like they definitely persevered. Thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast.
You're very welcome.
Speaking with Roger about the British home children was really enlightening. It's amazing that this immigration policy ever really happened. After conducting this interview, I was speaking at the Alberta Genealogical Society conference in Edmonton, and I learned even more about the subject from the conference chair, Shannon Cherkowski. When I returned home, I was met by a package on my doorstep containing 4 volumes of the Alberta Genealogical Society's quarterly journal. It's called Relatively Speaking. Canada designated 2010 as the year of the British home child, and the journal, Relatively Speaking, spotlighted the subject with an article in each edition throughout 2010. The journal is really, really well done, and these articles in particular are excellent as they shed so much light on really this very important part of history and with a lot of personal stories. So if you have a British home child in your family tree, I highly recommend Roger Kershaw's book, New Lives for Old, and I'll have a link for you to the book in Amazon in the show notes. And of course, when you use our links to Amazon on the website to make your purchases, you're also financially supporting this free podcast at no additional charge to you. So we very much appreciate that. And I also recommend that you get in touch with the Alberta Genealogical Society. You can reach them on the web at abgensoc.ca.
Profile America, Tuesday, May 31st. The nation's first daily newspaper, the Pennsylvania Evening Post, began publication this week in 1783, printed by Benjamin Town in Philadelphia. Americans' hunger for news was such that by 1850, there were some 250 dailies. The number of newspapers peaked 100 years ago, when there were 2,600 dailies published across the nation, with a circulation of over 24 million. Today, with increasing competition from the internet, television, and radio, the number of daily newspapers in the U.S. has dropped to just over 1,400, with close to 49 million subscribers, about 500,000 more by Sunday editions. You can find these and more facts about America from the U.S. Census Bureau online at census.gov.
Thanks so much for joining me and Howie, my dog Howie, who's been joining me here in the office today. Thank you for joining us for Genealogy Gems podcast episode number 111. If you would like information on anything that we talked about here on the show, you will find it in the show notes. So head to genealogygems.com, click podcast in the menu, and navigate your way to episode number 111. And of course, to stay in touch with what's going on and what's new here at Genealogy Gems, I hope that you'll sign up for our free newsletter. Again, just go to the homepage and click the newsletter sign up button, and you can do that for free, and we'll send you info about what's coming up on the show. And as always, you can leave a voicemail on our voicemail line, 925-272-4021. Well, my goodness, May of 2011 is already coming to a close, and Jamboree is just around the corner. That is coming up. I hope that if you are considering attending Jamboree in the Southern California area in June, it's June 10th through the 12th of 2011, go to the Genealogy Gems Facebook fan page, because we have an opportunity for you. If you're going to be attending Jamboree and you want to come and see our live Genealogy Gems podcast that we'll be doing on Sunday afternoon at 12 o'clock noon, you have an opportunity to post one of your ancestors' written documents showing their handwriting, and we are going to select one lucky person to come up on stage and join me and certified handwriting analyst Paula Sassy as she analyzes your ancestors' handwriting. It's really interesting stuff. As you know, she's been on the show before, and it's just fascinating. So we're looking for a guinea pig, somebody who's going to donate one of their documents and be a part of our live show. So again, head on over to the Genealogy Gems Facebook fan page. You have to click like to join in, and then you can post your document and just give us your name and the name of your ancestor and the date that the document was written, and of course, why you're interested in having it analyzed. Okay, well, that's it. Thank you so much for listening, friend. I'll talk to you soon.